hear me saying this, but you're missing out on a very informative introduction. The rest of you, those of you who made it, welcome to this little seminar on web accessibility. My name is Sebastian Strayford, and I have with me Dave, Jay, and Maxim, and also, okay, Juliana, she hit her video, but she's our bridge to the YouTubes. Our experts today, they're going to talk to you about inclusive coding, about web accessibility and why it's important, how you can use it. There's going to be a little QR code up in the corner here, if you can see where my cursor is. It leads to a supplemental Google Doc where you have links and resources. It's very useful. This is something that you're going to want to scan and keep with you even after this presentation. It's basically a collection of really good information and tools that you can utilize in your life, your work life after this. This event is, let's see, here we go. This event is co-organized between Accessibility.works and Beetup. I work as CMO for Beetup in my everyday life. Beetup is essentially a tech ecosystem where multiple companies working together towards the same goal. We have a school that provides education in IT. We help clients with outsourcing and tech solutions. And for us, making people's lives better, society better, the environment better, these are impact topics that are super important. Our mission is essentially to work with other companies, and in this case, cooperate with Accessibility.works, that do good in the world to increase the impact we're able to make. And that's why we're doing a seminar now together with them on web accessibility. Very important. Without further ado, let's introduce our first speaker today, just to go through introductions. Maxim.
Yeah, hello everyone, Max is here. So I'm a developer at Beetroot and in my everyday life, but of duty, I prefer like gaming. I'm anime enjoyer. So basically a type of guy who doesn't bother opening curtains in the morning. Yeah, like that. So nice to meet you all.
I need to ask Max, is that you on the picture?
It's rather representation of my everyday state of mind, something like this.
Okay, and we also have Dave Gibson with us. Let me hand the mic over to you.
Thanks, Sebastian. So first, I'm sitting here in the US, and I know many of you are joining from the Ukraine today. So to those of you in Ukraine and those with friends and family and colleagues there, I actually don't quite know what to say. I can imagine what you're experiencing. I guess what I would like to say is that I'd just like to share that you humble us all with your bravery and your ingenuity and your perseverance. You are all heroes, and it's a great honor to speak with you today. So thank you. I'd like to first introduce my colleague, Jay Mullen. Jay has been in digital accessibility since 2003, when, as he said, he was rudely introduced to accessibility at AOL, if you remember AOL, due to a lawsuit way back when. His passion to ensure accessibility really started on that day, and almost 20 years later now, he has trained thousands of designers and developers and accessibility auditors. And he's also helped hundreds of companies make their websites and their web apps and their mobile apps accessible to people with disabilities. I'd like to add that Jay also serves on the WCAG 3.0 team. So he's working on developing the next set of standards for digital accessibility. So he is our bona fide expert in the field. In addition to being a gamer off duty, he's also a very serious Star Wars and Tolkien geek. I'm Dave Gibson. I'm the founder of Propeller Media Works and Accessibility.works. I've been in web design for the past 25 years. And if there's one thing I've learned over that period of time is that when facing a group of developers, make sure to disclose that I am not a developer. I'm a designer, I'm a developer. I appreciate universal design that balances form and function with accessibility. I also love crashing drones, taking photos, making a mess in the shop, and getting out to go snowboarding when we get snow. I got into accessibility about 7 years ago when one of our clients got sued because their website violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. This was a huge surprise at the time. Then I simply assumed that the law really only applied to physical structures. When I learned more and how the ADA applied to, quote, places of public accommodation, I clearly saw how the web must be such a place of public accommodation in today's digital world. So the light bulb went off and we quickly pivoted and dove into digital accessibility. Jay and I began collaborating and I established Accessibility.works, our digital accessibility consultancy, which specializes in human-based auditing and training services. Okay, so enough with the propaganda, let's get started. So according to our attendee polling, most of you are kind of in the beginner to intermediate level of digital accessibility. So what I'm going to try to do is hit on the basic points and provide context and orientation. And then I'm going to let Jay and Max take you in deeper on the technical side. But before we dive in, I expect many of you are wondering what A11Y stands for, or where this came from. Accessibility is a really long word. So rather than use all those precious characters on Twitter, they replaced the 11 characters between the A and the Y with the number 11. So with that mystery solved, we can answer the next fairly basic question: what is digital accessibility? I would define it as the practice of ensuring that digital interfaces and content are universally accessible to all people and assistive technologies. Which begs the next question: what are assistive technologies? Assistive technologies, which we often refer to as ATs, are devices people with disabilities use to overcome barriers and access physical and digital spaces. And we've got a short little video that introduces more about ATs.
Some people with disabilities may use assistive technology, or AT, to access content or perform tasks. This can be any equipment, software, or product that is used to increase, maintain, or improve a person's functional capabilities. There's a wide variety of AT products and applications that enable people to improve their ability to access technology. AT doesn't necessarily need to be high-tech or expensive. Did you know that if you are wearing glasses, you are using AT? Do you use Post-it notes to help with reminders? These are both inexpensive tools that can help improve your ability to perform a task and can be used by people with and without disabilities. Sumitra, an engineer at Microsoft, uses JAWS, a third-party screen reader that works with Windows to navigate her computer. Using the keyboard, JAWS allows Sumitra to hear everything on the screen as she navigates. She uses JAWS to help code, read and edit documents and emails, and much more.
Main landmark featured story slideshow heading level 2. Welcome. Heading level 2.
And Jackson, a technical program manager at Microsoft, uses Magnifier, built right into Windows 10, to enlarge text on the screen, making it easier to complete tasks and thrive in the workplace. Jackson also uses additional Windows 10 features in the Ease of Access Center, including enlarging his mouse pointer so he can locate it on the screen more easily, text cursor indication to help locate the small blinking cursor, and color filters to adjust color schemes when he has eye fatigue. Assistive technology comes in many forms and can be personalized to fit the person's preferences and needs.
So as you can see, there are many types of assistive technologies, and I want to highlight the last two. We saw Sumitra, she's using the JAWS screen reader. Jay will soon share a demo video that will dive a little bit deeper into JAWS to show this very popular screen reader. We also saw Jackson using Windows Magnifier. Screen readers and magnifiers are very common ATs. I would also like to add the keyboard, though, as another really valuable and common AT. Both people who cannot use a mouse and those using screen readers or other ATs depend heavily on the keyboard to navigate and to move through content. And this is also a very common source of many barriers that we need to address. If you're probably asking the question, is my website accessible? And basically, if you're asking the question, the answer is probably no. To illustrate, over the past 4 years, the WebAIM project that's put on by Utah State University has been running an annual test of the top 1 million homepages. Last year, 96.8% of those 1 million pages had significant accessibility barriers. And on average, each homepage had just a little over 50 errors per homepage. So it's important to realize that unless your website, your web app, or your mobile app is specifically designed and built to be accessible to screen readers and other ATs, it simply won't be. And why is that important? I mean, it's kind of almost a rhetorical question, but I think what's important is to consider that question depending on where you sit, who you ask. So for a person with a disability, of course, because the web and mobile apps are such an essential part of exploring, learning, connecting, shopping, and just living life today. For businesses, accessibility is important to not only avoid lawsuits, but to also attract more customers. And for all of you designers and developers on today, accessibility not only brings hopefully more meaning to your work, but these skills can really grow your career. Here's another quick video that with more points about the importance of accessibility.
According to the World Health Organization, 15% of the world's population experiences some form of disability. That's more than 1 billion people. Add in the aging population, and you have a large number of people that may be unable to access your website or app. Not only are you limiting your digital reach, you could even be opening the doors to litigation and lawsuits. By embracing accessible design, you can deliver a highly engaging and inclusive experience to all users, including those with visual, hearing, physical, and cognitive disabilities. Accessible websites also attract more users. They're given preferential ranking by search engines. Plus, they draw more users with accessibility requirements, in many cases, establishing a new group of brand advocates. In more and more countries, regulation is requiring organizations to think about accessible design and meet global accessibility standards like WCAG 2.1. These standards cover practices relating to colors, images, video, and other areas of accessibility.
Great. So we've established, there are many reasons to embrace accessibility. And the next question is really, all right, so we understand that, where do we start? And before moving a single pixel, actually, if you could just go back a real half slide. Before moving a pixel, I always suggest identifying who your target users are and what their needs are. I'm sure many of you have used the process of creating personas or profiles as an exercise to pull you and your team out of your shoes and put them into the shoes of the user. However, in practice, typically when we create personas for a project, we rarely consider people with disabilities, such as those with vision loss or cognitive challenges or restricted mobility or hearing impairments. So I recommend building a persona for each disability and consider the challenges they may face. And dive in deeper. Try blindfolding yourself and using a screen reader to better understand this user's experience. You will quickly gain a better understanding of their challenges to improve what you design and build. Understanding your audiences and the tools they use will help you design and build better experiences for all. Now, switching gears, I'd like to outline the forces that are behind this shift toward universal design and digital accessibility. So in the past, I would say 6, 7, 8 years, accessibility has really become a big deal, especially in the US. And there's both a carrot and a stick behind this focus and this movement. The carrot in this case has motivated brands with a social mission. Companies like Ben & Jerry's and Patagonia, who value diversity, equity, and inclusion, see accessibility as a key aspect of their corporate mission. Also, worldwide, there are over 650 million people with a disability. And in the US, there's 61 million people. And you know what they all have in common? They all love ice cream. So yeah, it's really good. It makes really good business sense also. However, in reality, what's really driving accessibility the most is really the threat of lawsuits or fines, plus the potential risk to the brand if labeled as, quote, discriminating against people with disabilities. That's definitely not a good look. In the US, in just the past 3 years, we've seen a 40% increase in federal lawsuits. Last year, that total was over 4,000. In this, next slide, Sebastian. And this isn't just in the US, this is really globally. Most developed nations have laws or regulations that require digital accessibility. And as you can see, most reference the Web Content Accessibility Guideline as the standard. The WCAG or the WCAG, or some pronounce it WCAG, some say WCAG, whatever fits you, GIF or GIF. This was established and managed by the W3C, and we are currently in version 2.1, and we expect 2.2 will be published hopefully later this year, which will add 9 additional criteria. On the horizon, we have WCAG 3.0, which Jay and others on the WCAG team are working on. This is going to be a more dramatic change, but we won't expect to see this for a few more years. Since this is basically the common standard, it is the WCAG that we measure against. Now, accessibility doesn't just rest on the shoulders of developers. Designers must make sure that they are providing ample contrast between text and backgrounds. They must be also very careful about how color is used. 1 in 10 men have color blindness amongst other issues. So we must be careful not to use red to mean stop or green to mean go. Designers must also establish visual focus states for buttons, links, fields, and other page elements with high contrast outlines to show the location of the cursor. Maxim's going to provide some examples of that further on. Developers will need to dig in the deepest, for sure, and utilize existing semantic markup diligently, and learn ARIA, which is a markup used to describe more complex interfaces to ATs. And developers will need to adopt testing tools and procedures for quality assurance. Content teams will also need to learn just the basics of the WCAG to ensure that they label elements properly, such as images and image alt tags, and use heading tags sequentially. Now, I can't emphasize enough how important it is not to over-rely on automated testing tools. The WCAG is nuanced and interpretive, and automated testing tools can only detect 30 to 50% of WCAG issues at best. So that's leaving a gap of 50 to 70% of issues that even the best software are going to miss. A good example here would be focus states in keyboard navigation, which are crucial success criteria, but which automated tools are not very successful in testing for. And this is why human testing is really, really important. Now, what you absolutely must avoid is the temptation to believe that a little widget or a little snippet of JavaScript code is going to automatically make your website accessible. Yet, there are many that claim that they can. We refer to these as overlay widgets or toolbars, and they are categorically rejected by accessibility professionals, advocates, and real people with disabilities. You've probably seen these, there's websites out there running an overlay. You're going to notice in the bottom corner, left or right-hand corner, a little icon that triggers a toolbar that opens up that allows you to adjust color contrast and font sizes and other elements. And unfortunately, this leaves website owners thinking that they've actually made their website compliant and are not at risk of lawsuits. However, they are wrong. And I really get why we would assume that they would work, actually. We naturally expect to find a plugin or a widget to solve, any number of issues like this. However, in reality, regardless of what claims, what AI is actually capable of, most of these claims are actually, frankly, bogus. Remember, AI or not, automated testing tools are going to miss 50 to 70% of WCAG issues to start with. So as any real person with a disability will tell you, not only do these not work, they actually tend to introduce new barriers. And in terms of legal protection, let me tell you, I get calls every week from companies that use an overlay and then get sued. Basically, that little icon is now a flag that screams, my website is not compliant. Come sue me. So now, before I pass the mic, let me just remind you all that universal design and digital accessibility can provide significant advantages to not just your company, but in particular you. These are skills that are in great demand now, and this is a great career. So, all right, let me pass the mic now.
That is great, passing the mic animation, and we're going on to Maxim, I think.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Dave.
Jay.
Thanks, Dave. What I'll be discussing today is how to start establishing maturity in accessibility. As Dave mentioned, many people who are attending this session are at the spectrum of beginner to intermediate, and establishing those initial steps to ensure accessibility you will find very foundational. Ensuring an accessibility experience means ensuring your digital experience accounts for the assistive technologies most commonly used by individuals with disabilities, and that each class of user is properly considered when developing your requirements, the profiles that David mentioned. This concept of universal design will help you avoid technical debt, make your experience more usable, and more widely serve a larger audience. From a product owner to a designer to a developer, you have to understand that user and the tools they use to be able to serve them properly. You have to know exactly what it means for an experience to be keyboard accessible, so a paraplegic, for example, can access, interact, and contribute to a web experience in a meaningful way. To do this, as Dave said, dive in deeper. Get out there and use the assistive technologies. Understand them more deeply. Try VoiceOver on an Apple iPhone or a Mac. Talk back on an Android phone. Try JAWS or NVDA screen readers on Windows platforms. Seek out instructional videos on YouTube and other resources to understand more deeply. If you do this, you will inherently avoid the most common issues plaguing a disabled user on the net. Let's get another brief look at a screen reader that specifically shows how dependent screen reader users are on a properly structured design. And we have a video here. SSB is now known as Level Access.
Hi, this is Jeremy from SSB. And today we're going to talk about how screen reader users navigate websites using heading commands. So if I hit my H key here, the screen reader will be notified that there are headings on this page, and it will tell me what the first heading is. I'm going to hit H here.
News heading level 2 link.
And there's the news section. So by all means, I should be able to down arrow here and read the page as I normally would, and there should be some news articles.
Link troops called to rescue amid Colorado floods.
There we go. Okay, so there is a news story, and I could activate that link if I wanted, but I want to see what else is here on the headings, so I'm going to hit the H key again.
Sports heading level 2 link.
And then it jumped me past the news section all the way down to the sports section, just with one keystroke. And we'll verify where we are.
Link follow : Fewerk takes aim at historic round.
Okay, so we are actually in the sports section now.
Entertainment heading level 2 link.
Then I press H and I'm now on the entertainment section. So this is one really cool way. They've really designed this page to take advantage of jumping around between headings, as I mentioned before, like headlines in a newspaper. They denote sections rather than just making the text look big and beautiful. This actually has a purpose. With the proper design, headings can be an integral part of how a screen reader user can get the most out of navigating websites.
All right. And those most common issues mentioned earlier, these are the issues that are most prevalent on the internet. They're most common in relation to litigation. Image alt text, the failure to describe images on a page that are meaningful to allow a blind or screen reader user to have the same level of understanding of content as a visual user. Visual focus design for keyboard-only users to track the programmatic focus throughout a page full of interactive elements. Programmatic labels and accessible naming of links to ensure that those interactive elements have accessible names that describe fully and explicitly their purpose. Table markup to ensure that table headers and table cells are properly associated, that sort functions are identified. Color contrast so that low vision individuals have the ability to perceive text meaningfully and be able to read it meaningfully. Heading structure, as you saw Jeremy mention in the video, it's the #1 method for a screen reader user to navigate through a web page. So starting at the basis as a designer and ensuring that your page has a logical structure and that you properly account for headers and make sure that they're not implicit is very, very important. With that, I'm going to turn over to a deeper dive into these issues, and I pass the mic to Max.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. So first thing first, for example, let's take image alt text attribute to start with. Screen readers, they can't describe images on their own. So when keyboard-only users reach an image on the page, they need to be provided with some explanation of what they focused. And this is the case for alt attribute. This attribute is of help here. Providing textual description of the image by this attribute is something that keeps image accessible for people with different kind of disabilities who otherwise couldn't figure out what's going on the screen actually. If it's not provided, if this attribute is not provided, then screen readers like Chromebox or NVDA, to name a few, are just going to announce that the image has been focused, and that's all, which might add to the confusion. On the other hand, if decorative image is your goal, then there are two ways to achieve it. First, it's empty alt attribute, not even space, even one space, or use ARIA attributes, namely ARIA hidden. But you need to remember that this is a more extreme way to hide image from AT, which should be your last resort. And the next thing to remember and to use is visual focus design. There are interactive elements on any page. It's like buttons, links, forms, you name it. Making interactive elements clearly noticeable is another accessibility concern. And visual focus is something that may draw the line between you and your audience that either prefers a keyboard-only method of surfing the page or just don't have any other choice, like vision-impaired people. Take links or buttons as an example. When users tap through them, they need to know exactly what they interact with. Hence, you need visual focus outline like that skip to the main navigation button or any other link. But if you have to deal with a link pretending to be a button, then you need to make sure that the focus outline is visible enough so the users are not lost. So the color should be different from the background of this so-called button. And another case you could see on the video, actually, like imitating of it, it's when you have a block of elements supposed to be a link, like list of articles. And you need to wrap content with a link, and that's how you make the entire block focusable instead of separate elements. So screen readers can read the entire content of it to provide information to users. And last but not least, it's forms. When we are talking about plain inputs inside forms, it may be enough to have just a blinking cursor as an indicator that field has been focused. On the other hand, form fields like selects should have a visible outline to indicate it was actually focused. And since I mentioned forms and form fields, there is another crucial thing you need to remember. Form fields should be labeled, since labels is our tool to provide accessible names for them. But in case your design isn't meant to have labels, actual labels elements, then you can use area attribute called labeled by. And if you need to provide accessible name to a group of inputs, say radio button grouped in a field set, then legend element inside this field set is going to be your content of this element is going to be your accessible name for this group. And don't forget about custom elements like checkboxes. Most of the time, we need to create custom visuals for them. I mean, default checkbox is not exactly vivid thing. To match a design, you may need to use elements different from input and label elements. Say you need to use span elements. Already mentioned aria labeled by attribute would be of help here too, to replace label. And going back to links, there is another thing you need to take into account working with links in terms of accessibility, is that they should have accessible names. So, for example, text of the link may be somehow informative or understandable to users with no disabilities, but then we might have a visitor with severe visual impairment. And should this be the case, then text might not be as informative, and worst case, it's just confusing. And this is the use case for aria label attribute. If you need to provide description to be announced by AT to the user, then it's exactly what you need, and this is what's called accessible naming links. And should you deal with iconographics control like hamburger buttons, as you can see on the slide, then don't hesitate to use the area label attribute too, because buttons accept this attribute as well. If you find yourself working with tabular data, you need to take care of a few things to keep table as accessible for users as possible. Actually, there are three things. You need to use attribute role equal to presentation value with value of presentation on table tag. And you should never leave table header cells empty. And you need to use scope attribute to specify whether it's a column or row specific header. And just take a second to memorize this use of highlighting colors. You'll need it in a few moments.
Maxim, can I inject real quick on the previous slide?
Sure.
Only use role equals presentation if you're using a table for the purposes of a layout. When you are actually presenting a table with a true data presentation, make sure role presentation is not used, because I'll actually strip away the table markup. So role equals presentation should only be on a layout table when you're used for formatting content elements on a page. That way, all the table markup isn't read to a screen reader. Thank you, Maxim.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. And the next thing to talk about is color contrast. It's rather designer thing, not developer thing, but nevertheless, as a developer, any developer can still check whether contrast ratio is acceptable, and you can use it via DevTools inspection. And minimum acceptable ratio depends on font size. For example, if headers of this presentation slide were smaller and didn't fall into this large scale category, then we would be violating actually color contrast guidelines. And if we go back to color hues, that's what I was talking about actually. On this slide, we use much paler colors, and this is a good example of how lack of colors contrast may lead to users to be rather annoying. I mean, the user may be just annoyed by inability to read it properly, or user may be not able to read it at all. One way or another, it's bad accessibility, actually. And last thing, it's heading structure, what Jay mentioned already, but one thing to stress is that heading structure belongs not only to accessibility domain. Any developer knows that headers on the page should be structured and sequential. And this should be like, and this is the case not only for the sake of SEO, but to make it easier for AT users to surf through the page, what actually was mentioned on the video. And this concludes my quick overview of the most common accessibility issues. So I'm going to pass mic back to Jay. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxim. And Maxim made a few mentions to ARIA, the Accessible Rich Internet Applications Markup, which is a markup system specifically for ensuring a screen reader user has a meaningful experience. You can find the spec for a full read at the W3 site for ARIA 1.1, and 1.2 is currently under consideration. Coming back to maturity for accessibility, you do not need to carry the weight of identifying accessibility alone. There are automated tools, as we've mentioned previously, that exist on the internet that will help you identify issues. As Dave mentioned, while most automated tools only identify 30 to 50% of defects types, it can actually cover 70% of the volume of defects that occur. After the use of automated assistance, you have to rely on your own knowledge of the WCAG standards to do that human testing. But these tools can help you. Some of the leading tools out there are freeware options, such as Axe DevTools, Arc Toolkit, and Microsoft Insights that you can get as free browser plugins. They are very robust tools from companies who are fully committed to accessibility, and you should rely on these. While you may actually be an expert in accessibility, it is never easy to manually review hundreds of thousands of lines of code, as these tools can do almost instantly. And then there are enterprise-level tools used to increase a company's maturity holistically. These provide more in-depth scanning options, built-in knowledge bases, and they keep you abreast of the ever-changing requirements within the accessibility space. 2.2 is coming, 3.0 is on the 5-year horizon. Each of these presented are a full solution option that not only use automated scanning, but then also provide human testing guided automatics that provide methods for testing to fill that gap between the automated scan and human testing. This allows you to catch the defects that are only identifiable with manual testing. If your company is focused on growing your maturity and accessibility, one of these tools can be your best friend. Explore. There are hundreds of them out there. So these are just some of the most prevalent. As mentioned previously, do not rely on overlays. They are not an easy out. I recently tested a site where an overlay corrected 23 defects while introducing 18 new defects. They're AI-based, and that AI cannot always make informative decisions on what the ARIA label should be. So let's get into the process, how teams should ensure accessibility throughout a project lifecycle. Ensuring accessibility has to be an attitude from the project is simply an abstract idea. Shift left as far as possible. Consideration for accessibility must occur through every stage of a project, starting with the product owners and design. If you shift left, you will save time and money in the end. Shift left just means starting as early as possible and considering for accessibility. If you haven't even put anything to paper, but you know you're going to be using videos heavily in your experience, well, then you have a whole set of requirements that you have to make sure you prepare for. Early allows you to avoid a trip in the end. Know your users. Create profiles, as Dave mentioned. Know the tools, as I mentioned earlier, so that you can ensure the application interactions you design will consider the various needs of individuals with disabilities. Follow universal design principles, and you will serve the audience, widest audience possible, and produce a far more understandable and usable product. Annotate your designs deeply, something I stress very heavily to designers. I do not mean spec out your mocks for CSS purposes, which you do before you hand off to dev. I mean providing descriptive labels for all interactive controls that are explicitly provided in the design, i.e. do not use learn more 10 times in your mock, but don't detail them for development to make sure that they're informative for a screen reader. What a screen reader wants to hear is not 10 learn more links, because they won't have enough information to understand the actual end destination. They need to hear, learn more about training, learn more about us, etc. They need a fully informative. It's fine visually to have learn more because it has the benefit of visual context, but the screen reader doesn't have that benefit. So you have to make sure that you're adding ARIA markup or hidden text. And the only way the development will know how to do this is if design has controlled their annotation properly and given that information. Also, seek help. Leverage an expert if you have questions or are growing in maturity. It takes time, persistence, and repetition to get accessibility right. If you do not have external relationships that can assist you here, focus on developing internal champions and grow them to support your teams. The purpose of all the above for design is to control what you can control and set development up for success. It allows a designer to protect the integrity of their design in ensuring its usability as they originally intended. Okay, next, thank you. Of course, design hands off development. And to keep accessibility in the limelight, the development team must do the following. First, be knowledgeable. Know what it means to code accessibility. Be a steward for accessibility for your product, for your company. Speak up and ensure the product owners are considering what it means, that your definition of done in agile development explicitly states an expectation of accessibility before a story can be accepted. Use automated tools to scan your code before submitting a build. Will identify all defects? No, as we mentioned, but it will improve it. Again, leverage an expert. If you're creating non-standard HTML elements, make sure you work with someone who knows how to make them accessible. If you do not, you will be creating technical debt. If you create a div with JavaScript event handlers to allow it to be mouse clickable and act however you want, you are not considering what it is necessary for a keyboard user. You have to then use ARIA to set a role like link. Then you have to establish its keyboard accessibility with tab index equals 0. And then you have to set JavaScript event handlers for keyboard actions. That's a lot of code when in fact you could have just used an anchor or a button and standard HTML and avoided the complexity. So one of the key rules of accessibility is ensure using standard HTML whenever possible. Only use ARIA when there's no other recourse. The purpose of this is to avoid technical debt. Considering accessibility early and often is a way to ensure you do not have to bolt it on at the end to an extreme cost of both time and money. Accessibility is a continuous job that requires continuous focus. It is not a one-time deliverable. You can't say, oh, done. It must be part of all deliverables and considered universally and continuously. And it must stay the focus even after launch as the product evolves and enhances. One last point. Even your MVP, your minimum viable product, or your beta launch must be accessible. Litigations have targeted sites in early beta, or those simply being piloted for learning purposes. Next slide. Everything I've discussed is all about developing maturity as an organization for accessibility. As I've repeatedly mentioned, this is a continuous effort. It is not one and done. To ensure accessibility is a component of a company's culture, you must do the following. Find an executive voice, someone with the power to turn heads when they speak. While we would all wish that speaking sense in any level would drive action, it simply is not the case in large companies, not as much as you would like. You have to find a powerful voice that will support the transformative actions required to ensure accessibility is part of a company's DNA. Once that is done, train. Train everyone at differing levels. All new hires should undergo introduction to accessibility training in the first 30 days that declares the company's commitment to accessibility, and then create a syllabus defined by roles, product owners, designers, developers, content managers, and provide an LMS and webinars, etc., that target those roles, all to drive employee knowledge and awareness of accessibility throughout the project lifecycle. Next is to develop a method to define success. This starts with developing metrics related to your products and their accessibility. The key is to always know where risk lies and to properly prioritize remediation. And this is far easier when you have your finger on the pulse of your projects. Grade your sites based on the severity of accessibility defects existing. Ensure technical debt is managed and track its progress in the backlog. Put a complaint process in place and track it to understand the nature of requests so you can properly act in support of them in future projects. If you have multiple teams, track the Jira work tickets or whatever work system tickets related to accessibility and see if a team needs a primer on accessibility. Only through metrics can you show quantifiable improvement in accessibility and therefore manage accessibility and your proper prioritization of efforts to support accessibility. Once you have that improvement, fully document it. Many clients in today's business climate are asking for accessibility conformance reports, known as VPATs in the United States, or voluntary product accessibility templates. They seek these documents to decide if they should adopt a product, how they compare to competitor products, which one is the most accessible. Having these declarations of your accessibility ready, complete, and honest will put you in a good light as compared to your competitors and can easily lead to more business. This is where the opportunity comes in that Dave mentioned previously. You have an opportunity to improve your standing with potential clients if you have your house in order for accessibility. Lastly, I have mentioned this at every level of the process for accessibility, but identify champions for accessibility. There are often people, once introduced to the concept, who find a passion in it because they find it new and exciting, or a challenge to conquer, or they may have personal connections to the topic with a friend or a family member who experiences a disability, and this opportunity to improve their world resonates in them powerfully. Take advantage of this. Provide your champions greater training, attendance to conferences, etc., and you will benefit greatly from their developing knowledge. Accessibility is a continuing effort which requires constant focus. Everything I mentioned is meant to guide you on developing maturity for that effort, but you'll need to identify the best methods for your own company and be part of changing your company's culture to ensure that you meet the needs of disabled individuals across the globe. With that, thank you.
Great, thanks, Jay. As we wrap up here, we are going to do some QA, but before I leave you, I'd like just to remind everybody that accessibility is, it leads to better user experiences for all users, whether you have a disability or not. UX will be improved when you go through the process of accessibility. You'll also end up with better SEO. You'll have alt tags on all of your images. The flow of the page will run better. You'll probably increase your efficiency and your speed. You'll be able to pick up more customers, 650 million people worldwide with a disability. You'll be able to lower your legal risk. And, frankly, it just feels good to be able to take the opportunity to help people who are most vulnerable. So I guess next slide, the final point is that accessibility increases not just the value of your company to your customers, but your value as an employee. And I know I've emphasized that, and I just wanted to re-emphasize that because this is a really growing field, and this is a really important skill set to have. So pass the mic back to you, Sebastian.
Yeah, wow, what a ride. We've learned a lot about web accessibility. It's been very interesting to hear. I think it's definitely increased awareness, especially for me. Why do I know this? And I have an understanding now that I didn't have before about how many people out there that this benefits. Okay? I think like every listener on this call, they'll have some people in their target audiences. They'll have some people that will benefit from them spending some time extra on this. So with that said, I want to remind, I know there have been some issues with the QR code during the YouTube stream. We weren't able to fix that, but you have had a link in the YouTube chat, in the description there. You can also scan the QR link here for the supplemental material. It's the big one on the top. I also want to take this opportunity to talk about the Beetup Tech Relief Fund. So a part of the Beetup ecosystem, one of the things we started a fund to help people in Ukraine who have been victims by the ruthless war that Russia started. And if you go there, you can scan this code, you can donate. We have contact with a lot of grassroots organizations in Ukraine to really make sure that any donation you make gets to where it can make impact. Please do that. Also, quick thanks to Andreas, Oliana, and Diana for helping do some of the prep work for this, making it possible. Now, the last thing we're going to do, because we're not quite done yet, is we're going to take in some questions from the audience. And Uliana, who is our social media bridge, as we agreed before, maybe you have you seen any questions? Do we have anything?
I've only seen questions about the QR code so far, but I know that we are coming in on live with some delays, so please don't be shy, ask any questions that you would like to know about, and I will pass them to Sebastian and to everyone. So we have our first question. I will just copy it to you.
You can, why don't you read it?
Yeah, I will. Actually, I will. So what can you say about alternative text? Who should be responsible for writing alternative text? And what about alternative text for complex and or dynamic images? For example, visualization of mathematical exercises.
Sure. I should probably answer that one.
Sure.
So let me start at the end and work back to the beginning of that question. What about complex images? An alt attribute for an image shouldn't really go beyond 100 characters, because then you have a bit of a cognitive overload if you're trying to explain this very massive complex images such as a chart or a data presentation. So in those instances, you want to give a pithy alt attribute to that complex image, but follow up with a reference to see long description. And then you should have a region on the page, and it does not need to be visible. This could be just for the screen reader user, because the visual user is getting context from the visual display. That has a long description. So it's a role equals region with ARIA label long description for graphic A. And then you have a parsable description of all the details of the alt image there, so that there's the full understanding. This comes up a lot in assessments when test questions have these complex images. You have to be very detailed, and an alt attribute is not parsable. It reads as one extreme read experience to a screen reader. So you want to make sure that it's parsable code in a long description, not the long description HTML attribute, but in a region name, a long description. Who actually is responsible for writing that alt text? Well, in a complex alt image, it has to be an SME or a subject matter expert. If it's a chart on migratory trends for geography or human geography, well, you need somebody who understands that to actually describe it. You can't expect development to do it. So this goes back to design annotating completely. In this case, design would just have to be a bridge to that SME and make sure their annotation calls it out, probably in a separate document for image descriptions. When it comes to general images, just, there has to be a decision point of whether or not that image is meaningful or decorative. If you have an image of two heads of state shaking hands, but then in the article itself, you actually call out the fact that they're shaking hands, then the image itself is redundant. So why add to the audio clutter? You can hide that with a null alt, which Maxim mentioned is an alt equals quote, quote, with no spaces. That hides it explicitly from the screen reader. We usually try to rely on design to identify, because they're always the ones identifying and creating and cutting those images. They should be the ones in their annotation to say, this is a decorative image. And if it's decorative, it's going to null. They should also say, this is an informative image. And if an image is informative, that means it has to have a descriptive alt text. And that alt text, again, has to be pithy, less than 100 characters, describe the core message intended by the image. I hope that answered the question.
Is the question longer, Uliana? The next part of it, or is that in your question?
I think it was 3 parts. I answered 3 parts.
No, there's actually 3 questions. Are there any attributes like alternative text for images that would describe the video section?
That would describe the video section. I don't know how to take that. So what I'm going to assume is if you have a video embedded on a page, it's usually embedded in an iframe. That iframe is sometimes referred to as the video section of the page. All you need to do is it would not be an image in that case. It would be an iframe that just needs a descriptive title attribute. So you would want to describe it with name of video dash video. You want to name the content and then name its media type. in that iframe. If you're talking about video thumbnails, which are used as controls to launch a video player, that is often an image. You would simply make sure that reads play video title as a meaningful description for the video sections. I hope I understood that question correctly.
I think you did. Yeah.
Third question.
So let us know in the comments if the question was answered. So the third question is, are screen readers compatible with the content lazy loading approach?
Can you reread that last portion? I heard, are screen readers compatible with content, then what?
I can also repeat it. Are screen readers compatible with the content lazy loading approach?
So that's actually a good question. When a screen reader comes to a new page, it reads in DOM order, top to bottom. The page title in the menu bar is the first thing to read, and then it reads everything sequentially. If the page loads within a few seconds, you're probably not going to run into an issue because the user is very likely still going through or interacting with content. If there's a delay in loading of content, such as a spinner on the page or such, and it's actually creating dead space for a screen reader because the content's not there, then that element itself should be described, i.e. it should read pages loading, progress 50%. But if you don't have that, it can just say pages loading, and then in 2 seconds, pages loading. And then when it's complete, pages loaded. And then the user knows to view the content. I actually turn over to Maxim in regards to lazy loading because I'm not very familiar with that exact concept.
It's basically you want to delay loading of some content for mostly images. It's usually images to save bandwidth, to make page load faster.
So yes, screen readers, yes, are compatible with the lazy loading. Before they tend to get to those graphics, they'll have been loaded. Screen readers, again, start at the top, work their way down. While there's hotkey navigation that allows them to jump quick, even with the images not loaded, if you have an alt text on the image, that will still read. So yes, that was a much easier answer. Thanks for explaining that to me, Maxim.
All right, I think we have a next question.
Yes, there is a question that goes like this. I know some accessible sites have hidden links at the top of the markup, allowing users of screen readers to jump to certain bits of content, for example, jump to navigation or jump to content. So what are your comments on this approach, and how detailed would you get with these links? Do these hidden links affect CEO somehow?
So what that's referring to is skip to main content links. It's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, Success Criteria 2.4.1 bypass blocks. What I think about it is it's a must. The necessity for this is to help keyboard-only users to avoid having to tab through every repeat element of a page's banner before you get to the page's main content. So if you have 50 links, which some people, because of the way they manage their menus, may have 50 links in their top navigation. A keyboard-only user may have to go through the tab, etc. And think of a paraplegic whose only way of tabbing is to use a mouse stick to tab a switch. You're forcing them 50 times to dip their body or do whatever they need to do, a sip or a puff on a switch array. So it's extremely important requirement. And what it is it's the first focal link on the page. It comes into focus only when programmatically focused, and executing that link drives the user directly to the start of the main content, which is often aligned with the H1 and a role equals main identifier. One common error with those skip to main content links is a lot of times it will jump focus visually, but it hasn't actually pushed programmatic focus. So you have to ensure there's a tab index equals -1. So there's a hook for the JavaScript focus method to land. you don't have to. I've seen sites out there where it's skip to main content, skip to footer, skip to this, skip to, no, that's not as necessary, because if you have your page set up properly with header structure, that's already quick navigable. Just make sure, the one I consider paramount, skip to main content.
There was a second part of this question. I'm not sure if it's better for Maxime. Do these hidden links affect SEO?
I don't think it's much of an impact. I mean, it's not going to be really a problem for SEO, not all this single element. So you don't need to worry about it. I mean, SEO is a way more broad field, so it's not going to be ruined just by one button hidden off screen. On the other hand, if you try to hide something with just similar color, for example, white on white, then it's a huge problem. But this is not the case for this kind of buttons.
Right. I hope that answered it. Do we have a fifth question?
Yes. So what are the good sources for the accessible code best practices?
They should be included in the supplemental document to a significant degree, but obviously reading the World Wide Web Consortium Web Accessibility Initiative web pages, or the W3CY, specifically reading the WCAG 2.1 requirement set. There's a good, very informative site out there that Dave mentioned earlier for the 1 million survey, WebAIM.org. In fact, for the previous question, on skip links. If you go to webaim.org, put in skip link to their search, you'll find a very good article on how to do them properly. This is something you're going to want to really explore the internet for yourself. Leaning on blogs from the leading companies out there is very important because they know what they're talking about. It's very clear to see what is a universally recognized resource. But start with the standards themselves. WebAIM also has a cheat sheet for those standards, which is a really good pithy 6-page read. Yeah, I know pithy and 6-page don't go together much, but it's far better than the 180 pages of the standard. And there's communities out there too. You can join W3C as an observer. You can join communication groups that will support you. The people who do this are passionate about it. I hope that's come across in my voice. We will support you.
Yeah, for sure. You do sound passionate. I think the next question is coming from somebody in the overlay industry. What do you think, Fiona?
Or not.
Or not.
Okay, so the next question looks kind of tricky. Can you give an example of an issue that an ADA overlay might introduce that didn't previously exist?
I would have to pull up a file for that, and that's not something we really have time for. But what I most recently noted that the overlays, and this could be a configuration problem, was applying ARIA markup to the wrong components and therefore creating HTML validation issues. Also, when they notice that a control does not have an accessible name, that tool, that overlay, will try to inject that accessible name from all the available information they have, and that is a hit or miss. Oftentimes leading to a very lean description that could be misinterpreted. Obviously we give grief to those overlays because people seeking to use them are seeking them as a one-stop shop for, hey, we want to settle our accessibility needs. If you want to use them as a stopgap while you focus on your maturity, it won't hurt. But if you try and use it as your one and done solution, you're setting yourself up for failure and eventual lawsuit.
Yeah, nobody wants that, lawsuits.
Yeah, definitely. So the next question is, do you have any thoughts or suggestions on duplicate links? For example, HTML text with a button placed over an image. Both the button and image have links pointing to the same page.
Sure. Technically, as long as they're both described and accessible, there's no violation in those redundant links. But if I was doing an audit of a site, I do request those redundant links be addressed by establishing the image link, which is really there just to create a large click space through to your endpoint. Have aria hidden equals true, which hides it from a screen reader read experience, and tab index -1, which removes it from keyboard focus, all on the A element of the image, which leaves the textual link below as the primary link that has an accessible name, clickable, but the mouse user still has use of that image click to a link action. So you've reduced audio clutter of producing back-to-back links are exactly the same, but technically that is not a violation that will produce risk for you. You could live with it. I do encourage streamlining the code though, and doing what I suggested to remove one of them. So only one reads the screen reader.
Yeah, Jay, may I add one thing?
Sure.
Yeah, about this case with button placed over an image, you could just go with image and the button wrapped with the link. It's going to be more than enough, and you don't need to care about duplicated links. And then screen readers will be able to read whatever within this link tag. And by the way, one thing, if we go back to that question about jump to content links, I just reread that question. And one note: don't use exactly links for this so-called button. Use actual button element. Apart from the fact that it's not going to be a link, so you don't need to worry about SEO. Button element out of the box, they have better keyboard functionality. You may use either spacebar or enter button to actually trigger move of the focus to actual content, while with the links you'll need to configure for, if I remember correctly, a space button functionality, so JavaScript trigger it for you. So in case of jump to content, use actual button, not the link. Then you don't need to worry about additional link that may be considered redundant. But again, as was mentioned before, Google prefer accessibility ready pages. So I think Google is smart enough in 2022 to recognize your effort to make page accessible. But still, again, use button element.
All right, that was a great addition. Thank you, Maxim. Do we have any more questions? I don't see anything in the header.
So far, no other questions, but if you would like to ask something, please go ahead. We would love to share the knowledge with you all.
You can also, so in the resource, really, if you haven't seen the resource link, scan the QR, go read it. You also have the contact information to Accessibility.works. Reach out to them if you want to work with them or have any more questions. As you can see, they really know their stuff. Maxim, working at Beetup, also really knows his stuff. So I guess that's it. We're out of time.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Great. So thank you so much for coming and helping us. And thank you coming to listen to us, all of you on the YouTubes. And thank you, Oleana, for helping with the questions now at the end. I hope that we'll do more of these streams moving forward on similar topics, on other topics, but always with the goal of creating positive impact. Thank you, everybody. And I'll see you online. Okay, that's it. Close it down.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.